Hey everyone, thanks for joining the second episode of the Unspoken. My name is Anna Morgan-Palardy and I am the Programs Director here at the Chris Klug Foundation. I'm really excited for today's episode. I will be joined by Heartfelt Help Foundation's founder, Denise Redeker, and we will be discussing financial toxicity in transplantation. This is a topic that can never get enough discussion and awareness brought around it, especially at this time. So I'm really excited to be able to give a platform to discuss this and for people to learn more. But before we dive into that, I'm going to do a little new segment called CKF in the Brief. And so that's going to be all about what we have coming up here in the next few months. So if you don't know already, nominations for the 2025 CKF Awards are open. This year, we will be celebrating 3 individuals in the community who have gone on to do extraordinary things and promote organ donation and support those in the community. So if you know somebody whose dedication and hard work deserves recognition, please nominate them today. The winners will be announced in April during Donate Life Month and will receive a trip to Aspen along with one guest for our annual Wine and Dine Gala in August. We recognize our Hero Award winner, who is a living donor, donor family member, or in honor of a donor who has inspired others with their decision. A Bounce Back Give Back Award winner, who is a transplant recipient who has not only bounced back from their transplant, but gone on to do incredible things for the community and inspire others and promote the message. And finally, a community champion who is a caregiver or doctor, staff member for a nonprofit or OPO, transplant family member or friend who has gone above and beyond to promote the message and support those in the community, and just an all-around advocate. So if you know somebody who deserves to be recognized and celebrated, again, please nominate them today. This April for Donate Life Month, we will be running a Read and Register campaign that aims to educate students before they get to the DMV and inspire them about organ donation. We'll be working with Abby Gray and Clayton Sparks Leaves His Mark, Brenda Cortez and Howl the Owl, and Lisa Bolt and 17 Again. We'll be providing 50 elementary, 50 middle schools, and 50 high schools with 2 copies of one of these books to educate and inspire their students. Along with these books, we will be accompanying them with educational materials, swag, and more to help the teachers inspire and educate their students. If you know a classroom that would like to get involved, please check out our website, chrisklugfoundation.org, to learn more. We have so many exciting things coming up this year, and I cannot wait to tell you more about them. But let's jump into today's topic and bring on our guest speaker, Denise Redeker. Well, I am joined today by the wonderful Denise Redeker from the Heartfelt Help Foundation. Denise is a heart transplant recipient who was inspired to found the Heartfelt Help Foundation to help those in Northern California with expenses medically required, but uncovered by insurance. So she is doing wonderful work, and I can't wait to talk to her about financial toxicity. Thanks for joining us, Denise.
Thank you for having me. I'm always happy to chat with you guys.
We love having you on. Okay, so first I'm going to start with a fun icebreaker. So if you could be on any game show, what game show do you think you could win?
That's a good question. And the sad thing is I don't watch a lot of television, so I'm not really familiar with a lot of game shows. Considering the amount of fairly useless information I have stored in my head for no apparent reason, I might be good on something like Name That Tune, or maybe even Jeopardy, like something that asks you random trivia questions. Because the amount of random useless information that is stored in my head that I cannot get out, but I also cannot remember, like, what I had for breakfast this morning is large.
I like that answer. See, I'm a classic Brit, and there used to be this TV show called The Weakest Link when I was a kid. And it was kind of like a cross between Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and Survivor, in that they would ask a question. There'd be like a series of, people. They would ask a question. If you got it right, they added more money to the pot. And if you got it wrong, they took money away. But then at the end of each round, they voted somebody out. And so you had to be really good at trivia, but you also had to be like really clever of who you voted out and who was going to backstab each other. So I've always wanted to be on that one. I don't think I could win it, but I would really like to be on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the difference between you and me, is I am not competitive in the slightest. So that would just terrify me. I would not love that.
I'm one of those like too competitive for my own good people. Like my husband hates doing anything with me because I turn it into a competition.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't turn it. I'm the least competitive person at the transplant games. When I played pickleball, I looked at my partner and said, "You have to keep score. You will tell me what I have to say when it comes time to say what score it is, because I will not care." And he kind of looked at me like, "Are you insane?" And I was like, "I will not care."
I have to say, watching you play pickleball was one of my favorite transplant games. Things this year.
I love it.
It was great.
It was super fun. It was so fun.
Yeah, and you were waiting all day for it. You were like ready all day.
Oh, we were ready all day. They kept postponing it and postponing our time, and so it was. We had a blast.
Yeah.
And I think my partner thought that we were not going to have a blast because he was very competitive, and he realized quickly that I was not, and he thought it was going to be terrible. But even he was like, "We could be partners again next time," and I was like, "Yeah, see, I'm a fine player. I just don't like keeping score, and I don't care about winning."
Because if you can handle that for me, I'll just keep hitting the ball.
Yeah.
We'll be good.
Yeah, we'll be good. I will get every shot, I promise, but I will not care about. I will not.
And this year, you get to come join us in Denver.
I know. I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
It's going to be so fun. We're going to have great weather, and everybody's going to come, and it's going to be wonderful.
And it's in June, so it won't be like blistery hot summer heat.
Yeah, it'll be perfect. And it's like that dry heat here. So even when it's really hot, it's not too bad.
At least it's not humid like Birmingham, which was, for a California girl, was not fun.
Got to the arena and you were like drenched in sweat.
Exactly.
Although they did do a really good job, I think, of, a lot of it was inside and you didn't notice.
Yeah.
Bad.
Thank goodness for that.
Right. Who thought we'd want to be inside? Okay, well, let's dive into financial toxicity. So my first question, can you explain what financial toxicity in transplant is?
Absolutely. It's actually a fairly new term for me. I mean, we've been banding around the term financial inequity because that was what sounded right to us for a couple of years now. And then I came across in the last couple of months, I came across a UCLA study that was actually directed at cancer patients. It was a cancer study, but for the first time they used the term financial toxicity, and I thought, bingo, that is exactly what our families are going through and our patients are going through. And what it really is the huge economic burden that is on patients and their families that is resulting from their uninsured and medically related expenses, which is such a significant challenge to families who have taken time off from work to care for themselves or their family member, their spouse, or their child. And that significant expense, those significant expenses don't go away. And they in fact build up because transplant doesn't happen in a vacuum, which we've said for forever. The costs of your regular life, your rent payment, your utility payment, your cell phone, food on the table, all of those costs still exist in your world, except you don't have the income to pay for it because you're taking FMLA or other unpaid time away from work to care for your family member, yourself, your family member, your child. And so that money is coming from where? I don't know. And they don't know either. And so the debt spiral that creates is huge. Families from lower socioeconomic areas and communities can be tragic. It can result in the loss of homes. It can result in the loss of services. It can really financially devastate families.
Yeah.
And still, they have to care for their medically fragile family member or their medically fragile selves as they recover enough to get back to work. And even when they get back to work, that's getting them back to an income, but it's not helping them recover from what the debt for the last 3, 4, 5 months has accumulated.
Yeah. Well, and the cost of living just, for an everyday person is increasing or has increased over the years and through COVID. And so when you add something like a transplant on top of that, it's, you're struggling to pay your bills and you're healthy.
Exactly.
And when you add in a whole nother dynamic of being sick, and I really want to point out what you just said about, it's one thing when you have a family, and there's 2 workers in the home. But for individuals that are going through this alone, maybe without a support network, that's got to be terrifying. Not everybody out there has somebody to lean on and help them through it.
Well, my own adventure, not only to and through transplant, but in running Heartfelt Help Foundation, has taught me how privileged I was going through my own transplant because I mean, we had financial struggles. Unless you're independently wealthy, I think everybody does going through transplant. But we also had community. We also had people around us who saw our needs and stepped in. I had a friend who was a fitness trainer, and she did fundraisers at her fitness studio for us without us even asking, without us even knowing. And that saved our bacon. It was a huge gift to us. But not everybody has that community. And if you're from a lower socioeconomic area, then maybe your limited community is of a similar socioeconomic background. And so even if you did a crowdfunding campaign like Help Hope Live or GoFundMe or whatever you choose to do, the amount of money that your community is going to be able to raise is not going to make much of a difference in solving your financial toxicity issues.
Yeah. Because on average, how much, a transplant, like a heart transplant, how much are people looking at?
The last big national study, and I'm sure there's got to be something more current, but the last one that I could find was in 2020, and the average cost was almost 1.7, just under $1.7 million. My transplant cost in 2018 cost $3 million. Now, insurance pays for a chunk of that, but it doesn't pay for everything.
No.
And so there are copays, there are deductibles, there are costs that are technically not medically related. So they're not even something insurance would cover, but you've got to do it, like your transportation back and forth, your parking costs, your food getting back and forth. Gas prices, especially in Northern California, are up above $5 a gallon.
Yeah.
And when you're driving 2 and 3 and 4 hours from your home to your transplant hospital, that's a huge cost all by itself. And then you don't have an income. Let's just double that with you don't have an income. But you still got to do all of this because your medically fragile transplant patient, family member, child, spouse, yourself, still needs to do follow-up care, still needs to go through this transplant to survive.
Yeah, and is often required to, fulfill some of these steps to medically get their transplant.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so going off of the back of that, before individuals get their transplant, how transparent is the information they're provided? In your experience / running Heartfelt Help?
In all honesty, I think that varies from facility to facility about how transparent it is. And the other coupling factor is how transparent you as a patient are about your own financial issues, because you know that as a patient, I know when I went through my transplant, the one word that reverberated in my head was compliance.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned that I have to be compliant with their guidelines and their rules about how to get to and through transplant. To be considered for transplant, I had to pass all of the tests. I had to pass the psychosocial evaluation. I had to pass, the physical evaluation. At that time, you had to pass a financial evaluation, but you don't necessarily have to do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things make you question. I don't know how many times I heard, we don't deem you to be compliant. You may not get a second heart transplant if you need one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of that inspires a lack of transparency on our part as the patient too.
Yeah.
Because we don't want, if a social worker comes up to you, for
Mm-hmm.
example, and says, hey, you're going to have to come up with X number of thousands of dollars in order to pay for what insurance doesn't, what are you going to say? Of course I will.
I'll find it.
I'll find it somehow. I will figure it out, because you are not going to let this second chance at life for yourself, your family member, go by because of something as dumb as money. So are we as patients transparent with our transplant hospitals? Probably not. Should we be? I can't answer that question. I don't know that I was completely transparent.
Mm.
And so I don't know what that solution is as far as transparency. I think that by writing articles, by talking about the hidden costs, by helping families prepare and navigate through this whole adventure a little bit better, makes all of us more aware. But I would hazard to guess that if you interviewed 50 social workers, that they wouldn't even know about what's going on beyond the hospital walls for their patients.
Yeah, which is critical. I mean, knowing what is out there, and the hospitals, the social workers knowing it, but also as patients, doing the research to find what is out there, and having, where you can, having that support network help and support you by finding, the organizations that are there doing the work that are there to help and support you is critical in financially supporting yourself, and hopefully making you feel more able to be transparent about your situation, and knowing those tools. So what, for financial toxicity, typically is the impact on the patient who is undergoing or has undergone a transplant? What is that impact on them?
Well, the impact can be severe for families and largely depends on how it's affecting that particular family. If it's affecting them pharmaceutically, then perhaps they're not adhering with their medication that they're required to take, including their anti-rejection medication, which obviously can have drastic effects on your life expectancy. I actually have talked to families who have cut their immunosuppressant medications in half because they can't afford whatever their copay is. And so they're making them last longer at their own personal risk.
Or if they need another transplant, runs that at risk, as well.
Exactly. It also affects if they can't afford to travel back to their transplant hospital for their annual exam because their transplant hospital is hours or a flight away from their home. The chances that they're going to forego that increase with financial toxicity, with ever increasing debt. The chances that they don't make their appointment, or they just postpone it and then postpone it again and then postpone it again until they feel like it's either life or death, or they can finally afford it. But all of these things add to a patient's overall health and well-being, and all of that impacts the longevity of this gifted organ. And that's kind of the bottom line here, is that we as transplant recipients have been given this incredible gift of life, and it's our job as patients to ensure the longevity of it by doing everything we can, but it's not just our job. It's ours as a community's job to support families who are less privileged than us.
Yeah.
To navigate this well so that all of these gifted organs have an hopefully equal chance of long life, of survival, because they're getting follow-up care. It also affects, I've seen our pediatric patients who are old enough to know that and I don't ever mean to say this in a way that makes it seem like it's their fault, but kids see that their hospitalization costs and their medication costs and the travel costs for their transplant and follow-up care has cost the family and has put the family in this financial position. And no matter what, the parents will say, of course, that it's something they would have done no matter what, because this is what we as parents do. There's a mental health aspect to this too.
And I'm sure not just the patient, but the caregivers, the mental health aspect on knowing that you have to provide your, money to get your son or your daughter or your spouse, all of these things, but not knowing where you're going to get it from.
Exactly.
Gotta be incredibly painful and stressful and puts their health then at risk too. And then we're kind of compounding health issues.
Right. It is not only a debt spiral, but it's kind of a doom spiral too, because of the mental health component of all of this, because stress begets health problems. It's a natural component of it. And there are actual studies that exist that show that patients that are experiencing financial toxicity have worse overall health outcomes.
It doesn't surprise me at all.
No. When you think about it, it's just that the problem is that we don't think about it.
Yeah. It's easier not to face it. And you look at transplant and it is such an amazing gift and you don't ever want to take away from that. So I think sometimes we're a little scared of acknowledging some of the things that aren't perfect with it because we don't want to lose, the fact that it is an incredible gift and it is important to acknowledge. It is amazing.
Absolutely. And I think that's why we stop the conversation at the gratitude part, and why even OPOs want us to stop the conversation at the gratitude part, because the gratitude, and it's an important piece. I am grateful every day that I get to be here to do the work I'm doing, to just be here and live and do all the things. But I think we're all complex enough and reasonable enough human beings that we realize that you can hold two things at the same time. And I can be immensely grateful and incredibly frustrated about the fact that we don't take care of the least of us that are going through this financial toxicity because of transplant. We don't take care of them well.
Yeah. When you think how worried everybody just is in their day-to-day about getting through the day, and I know I've had days where I'm like, how am I going to pay my electric bill at the end of it? But when you think of those who are thinking that, and then on top of that thinking, how am I going to pay my prescription or picking up my immunosuppressants, or how am I going to pay for my next doctor's visit, my electric bill becomes minuscule in comparison because I'm still living a healthy and happy life.
Right.
And what can we do to support those that don't have that opportunity and are facing life and death?
Who are members of our community, our transplant community. And we talk a lot about just the general we in the transplant community. We talk a lot about supporting each other through these things, but I think we largely don't have a good idea of what to do. And so we're trying to be at the forefront of figuring out what to do.
I love that. Okay, on to our next one off the back of that. What programs and organizations are currently available, and not just available, but effective in assisting patients with these financial burdens?
Not many. If you have community and you can get to it early enough, we strongly suggest that patients set up a Help Hope Live account. Help Hope Live as a crowdfunding resource, and will, if you have a community and you can advertise it. The problem is, of course, you are now responsible, in addition with taking care of this medically fragile member of your family, you also have a responsibility to become this social media manager that you never really intended yourself to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that is complex and hard and sometimes feels overwhelmingly impossible for families in need. Is a resource nonetheless, because if you can access that community and raise some funds, they will pay bills on your behalf and hopefully keep you going during the worst of it when you're away from work. And in a perfect world, that's how this works.
Yeah.
Is you have community and you start a Help Hope Live account and you raise enough money so that your bills at home get paid while you are going to transplant, going to and through transplant.
Yeah.
Until you can get back to work. Other organizations, national organizations, have small grants that occasionally they give. Every transplant facility has a charitable fund that can step in and help with something, or at least every transplant facility I've run into, which is my experience is in Northern California. So every transplant center here has some sort of fund. They are very limited and very underfunded, even for organizations hospitals that have huge million and billion dollar nonprofit arms. All of that money is largely set towards different research projects and parties in the hospital, and not really supporting the day-to-days and housing costs for patients. And so that there just isn't a ton of money. Heartfelt Help Foundation is hopefully, if we can get it funded, launching a program this year that we are going to name after one of our pediatric kiddos that did not make it through his adventure to and through transplant. And so we're going to call it Axel's Fund. And it's a crisis intervention fund where for families that we've worked with housing, we can step in and help pay a past due rent bill or an overdue electricity bill or water bill, keep our cell phone on. And also, in partnership with that, we're hoping to pair these families with a financial money manager that can help them create a strategy to get them out of the debt that transplant has brought them to, so that they can actually relaunch their real life with a plan. And with a strategy.
Yeah. Because I think that's critical, because transplant is a treatment. It's not a cure. It's a treatment.
Exactly.
And so is getting back on your feet from debt. It's not we paid our bills and we're good to go. The next bill is still coming tomorrow. And how do you plan to recoup from that and be ready for it and prepared and ahead of the game?
Right.
Or at least catching up.
Yeah, that's the problem with debt when you go a significant span of time without an income, is that you may get back to your income, but getting out of the debt from the previous 6 months is not going to be an overnight process by any stretch. And you've still got medical bills coming in. You've still got treatment, because yourself, your family member, your child is still having to go back and forth for regular follow-up care, is going to have to go into the cath lab or have a biopsy at some point. And all of those things are expensive. All of those things require a copay. I just went in for my 7th annual cath lab visit and got the bill yesterday in the mail, and it was $34,000 for an outpatient procedure. Luckily, I did not have to pay anywhere near that. But I also am privileged enough that I have great insurance. But what happens to people who have to pay 20% of that? They're on an 80-20 plan, and they have to pay 20% of $34,000 for an annual outpatient visit?
And I think so many insurance companies do a little bit of the, is this medically necessary? And for transplant recipients, everything's medically necessary. These steps are needed, and we always advocate to be ahead of the game and make sure you're doing all of these things. And that makes it very hard when it might not be medically necessary, but you need to be ahead of the game to keep your numbers,
Right.
keep your organ healthy.
And I mean, that adds to the stress too, is that if you are waiting for a prior authorization so you can get your standard annual test, that's adding to stress, plus the stress of not knowing how much that's going to cost you and how much more debt that's going to put you in. It does become a snowball.
Yeah.
A snowball rolling quickly downhill. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
And I think it's so important for those who have gone through transplant. I was having a conversation with, I can't remember who it was, but somebody the other day, and they were saying how they find it disappointing how many people get their transplant and they don't want to discuss it. I was sort of saying, well, everybody deals with it differently and everybody has their different coping things. But, thinking about it and having this discussion now, for those who've had a transplant and are sort of wondering how they can help and do something, just talking about your transplant experience and everything you went through can be a huge help to those going through it now, not only by inspiring them, but also just getting the word out there about transplant. Like, we're in the transplant community, we're much smaller than the cancer community. You hear cancer mentioned probably nearly daily. And transplant affects, over 1 million people have had a transplant now in the US. If every single person was sort of saying, I've had a transplant, this was my experience, we'd get that on their map and have so much more attention and light brought to these topics and support, I think.
Exactly. And everybody deals with it on their own. I know it took me a full year, maybe not quite a year, but pretty close to a year after my own transplant before I could talk about it. I mean, I would hide it. I wouldn't talk about it at all. All of a sudden, a light bulb went on when I realized that other people needed help getting through this.
Yeah.
Just like I needed help to get through it.
Yeah.
And I could choose to either continue to not talk about it, or I could choose to start figuring out a way that I can make this whole process easier for other people going through it. And I chose the second path, obviously.
Yeah. Love that you did.
But I think it goes beyond just talking about, like, this is my experience with the surgical side of it.
Yes.
I think we've got to give a full picture. We've really got to start talking about the financial part of it. Like, this is this gift of life, which was amazing and we are so grateful for, and was brutally hard on our family. Jobs were lost, houses were lost.
Yeah.
Income that we will never recover was lost. On the lighter side of it, promotions were lost. Career paths were lost, which is still devastating. I mean, it may not be financially like I'm losing my home devastating.
Yeah.
But when you've put a lifetime of effort into a career path, that's devastating too.
When I think lives get put on hold while you're going through something like transplant for not just the patient, but their entire family. Those life-changing decisions don't happen. And, especially thinking of kids, getting to an age of figuring out what they want to do in life and starting to think about work and things, it puts a huge stress, and it can really, stop people from reaching for the stars like we're always taught to as a kid.
Yeah. Absolutely. And is part of the whole story. And I think when we just show I got a new heart and now I'm running marathons without talking about the fact that now I might be running marathons, but I lost my job and I am still crawling out of debt, and I've lost my home and I had my power turned off. Without talking about that part too, we're doing a huge disservice to not only our transplant community, but the larger, bigger community, because we've talked about that, as you pointed out, we talk about that all the time with cancer treatments.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why That's why the support is there for financial assistance programs for cancer patients, because we talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a habit of doing, it's like that social media, looking into somebody's life, we put out what we want people to see.
Exactly.
Rather than what is there. And I think the more we put out what is truly happening and truly people go through experience, and not just financial, but mental and, physical and all of the different aspects that go into transplant, it makes a world of difference to the next person standing behind them, comparing themselves to what you see on the screen or through a story. By sharing what you actually went through, you're helping that next person.
Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you for sitting down to talk with me. I could talk about this forever.
This is my most recent passion. Obviously, I'm passionate about a lot of things, but this is my most recent.
I love it. We always get chatting when we're at conferences and things, and then it's like suddenly we look at the time and like 2 hours have gone by.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, I always like to finish with a question that I've kept. You've been on our webinars, and so I've definitely asked you this before, but what is one piece of advice you would like to leave our listeners with?
To be honest with yourself, I think other times I might have said ask all the questions, and that's still true. There's no question that's too dumb or too repetitive or too anything. Transparency requires courage, and a lot of times when we've gone through the trauma of transplant, we don't feel super courageous, although everyone around us says, oh, you're so brave, I could never do what you're doing. But we don't feel super courageous because it wasn't like we chose to do this. We just had to. But I think it's really important for your mental health, for your physical health, to be transparent with your family, yourselves, your community about all the things that are related to transplant, and realize that you can do that and be grateful at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. The more I think you tell or speak out about it, the easier it is for people to pick you up when you need it and be there and know how to be there.
Exactly.
Well, this was amazing. Thank you for sitting down with me again. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. And we will see you on episode 3 of The Unspoken.